Lesson number 18, the Eighth Amendment. The Eighth Amendment is going to deal with cruel and unusual punishment and excessive bail and excessive fines. So this amendment deals with what the government can do to you if you are actually convicted and charged with a crime. And you go through the whole process of court and jury and all that stuff, and then you're found to be guilty. So the Eighth Amendment deals with penalties. What can happen to you if you're going to have some kind of penalty enforced on you for something that you did wrong, whether that be jail time, paying a fine, or in some cases the death penalty. So our objectives are the things you'll be able to do. You'll be able to list and describe the rights afforded to Americans under the Eighth Amendment, meaning you'll be able to look and describe what's in the Eighth Amendment and the rights that you have listed in the Eighth Amendment. The questions you'll be able to answer by the end of the lesson: what rights are guaranteed under the Eighth Amendment, and how do these freedoms affect us today? So as always, we'll start off with reading the amendment, then we'll try and break it down a little bit, see what it means, and try and figure out what it has to do with us today. So the Eighth Amendment, I'll read it to you. It says, excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Excessive means like too much. Like if you eat 10 bags of Skittles, that's probably an excessive amount of Skittles, no matter how much you actually like them. So excessive means too much. So we'll try and break down each part of the amendment and try and figure out what it means. We're going to focus on the cruel and unusual punishment part. The excessive bail part deals with if you are held in jail, there should be a way for you to pay money to get out of jail until your actual trial. That's what bail is. And fines means you shouldn't have a crazy amount of money have to be paid for something you did wrong. Like if your car gets towed, or you get like a traffic ticket. A traffic ticket shouldn't be $1 million. It should be an amount that fits what the traffic violation was. So let's focus on the cruel and unusual punishments part. According to the Supreme Court, the Eighth Amendment forbids some punishments entirely and forbids some other punishments that are excessive when compared to the crime or compared to the competence of the perpetrator. So what that means is there are some things that the Supreme Court has decided are too cruel and too unusual or too weird to be punishments for people who are found guilty of committed crimes. So we're going to look at some of the things that the government is not allowed to do to you if you are convicted of a crime, and there's going to be a punishment inflicted on you. For a good chunk of human history, punishments have been very cruel and very unusual. You've probably seen some stuff in movies and things like that. The Eighth Amendment tries to protect people from those things that you've seen in movies and maybe in other history classes, things like beheading, for example. You've probably all seen that in a movie or in a history book. That would be an example of something that's too cruel and too unusual or too weird to be a punishment. So what are some things that have been found to be forbidden? There was a case called Wilkerson versus Utah in 1878, a long time ago, and the Supreme Court commented that drawing and quartering, that's when you basically split someone up into 4 pieces. Sorry for the graphicness of this lesson, but it's what the Eighth Amendment is about. Public dissecting, burning alive, disemboweling, all these things would constitute cruel and unusual punishment regardless of the crime. Those are things that cannot be done to you. And you might be sitting here thinking to yourself, why did that even need to be a court case? Why did the government think they could do these things? Because like I said, for a good chunk of human history, these things are acceptable punishments. They're things that are not seen as cruel and not seen as unusual. They're things that are accepted. The Eighth Amendment tries to protect us from these crazy types of punishments. Another one in Skinner versus Oklahoma, the Supreme Court ruled that forced sterilization of crimes was unconstitutional. Continued until the 1960s for the mentally ill. Forced sterilization means that if you commit certain crimes, you would be sterilized, meaning that you would no longer be able to have children. That punishment is something that does no longer exist today because of that court case. So all these things that we've talked about in this, while graphic and kind of tough to look at, it's important for you to see these because it'll make you kind of appreciate the Eighth Amendment a little bit more. It makes you realize the way things used to be and how the Eighth Amendment has evolved to protect us from these crazy types of punishments that used to exist. So why have things changed over time? Because people change over time. As society kind of moves on and people get more experienced, people start to realize that some stuff is pretty crazy and probably shouldn't continue to happen. So the evolution of decency is what I just described there. That over time, what we think is okay changes. So that's why the Eighth Amendment is kind of broad. What is cruel and unusual is determined depending on the time period. What about kids? Juveniles, you guys. What are your rights when it comes to the Eighth Amendment? Better than an adult. I'll give you some examples. In Graham versus Florida, another court case, a very recent one, the Supreme Court ruled that juveniles cannot receive true life sentences without the possibility of parole for crimes that are not homicide. Meaning that if you're a kid, they cannot throw you in jail for your entire life unless they feel that you committed homicide and it was too graphic or too much, and you deserve that penalty. But they can't just throw you in jail for your whole life. There's supposed to be the possibility of parole because you are a child, you're a kid, so maybe you'll change one day. The majority decision noted that almost no countries have true life sentences for juveniles, and few states have juveniles in jail indefinitely. So for the most part, if you're a kid, because of the Eighth Amendment, if you do something wrong, there's a good chance that you'll have the opportunity for parole, meaning that you'll have the chance to actually get out of jail. The chance to get out of jail. It doesn't mean that you definitely will. The big one. Whenever people bring up the Eighth Amendment and that cruel and unusual punishment part, the death penalty is what comes up. The death penalty is legal in a lot of states. We'll talk about how many in a couple slides. Some states it's not legal. So the death penalty is currently the big thing that's up for debate, and the Eighth Amendment is the thing that is used to debate whether or not the death penalty should be legal. So, is the death penalty cruel and unusual? Is killing someone too much of a penalty? Is it too cruel? Is it too unusual for committing a crime? The one thing about the death penalty is it's handed over by a jury, so people like me and you. It's not handed over by a judge or an attorney or anybody in the government. If somebody's going to be given the death penalty, that's decided by a jury, which is a protection because then the government can't just give the death penalty to whoever they want. There's some limitations to the death penalty. In one case, Atkins versus Virginia, somebody was found to be mentally handicapped. They cannot get the death penalty. If you execute someone under the age of 18 and they committed the crime when they were under the age of 18, that's not acceptable as well. So there are some people who cannot be given the death penalty regardless of which state they're in. So the death penalty, it is legal in Pennsylvania. It's legal in 32 states. So 32 states use the death penalty. There's only 18 states that don't use the death penalty, and that's evolved over time. It used to be a lot more states had it and a lot less states didn't have it. It's kind of starting to get a little more even on how many states have it and how many states don't. So let's look at Pennsylvania. It's legal in Pennsylvania. The way that they do it is lethal injection, which means you're actually injected with something that will kill you. Since 1976, there's only been 3. So only 3 people have actually gotten a death penalty. Like, it's actually been carried out since 1976. It's a long time and only 3 people. But there are currently 193 people on death row, meaning they're awaiting execution. Not all of them will actually get that far, but there are 193 people currently on death row. Some of them will avoid execution and probably just get life in prison. There have been 6 people who have been freed from death row because they were found innocent after being sent to jail. Imagine that. So you know that you didn't commit a crime, but then you go to court and you're given the death penalty, and then later on, before you're actually executed, it's found that you actually were innocent of that crime. There have probably been cases where people have been executed, but they were innocent of the crime, and they were found to be innocent after the execution was handed out. That's the big argument against the death penalty, is that there could always be new evidence that's brought up in a case that might prove something different or show another side of the story. But people who are for the death penalty argue that there needs to be a very stiff penalty, a very strict penalty in our society for people who do crazy, terrible things, and that kind of keeps people in check if they know that the death penalty exists. So it's something that's up for debate. Is the death penalty cruel and unusual, like the Eighth Amendment says? Let's debate it. People see differently on that. So for this assignment, make sure you answer the questions that are underneath. As always, if you need any help, just reach out. If not, good luck.